Hello, Cornerstone Church. Pastor Phil here, coming to you on day 16 of our 21-day study in the Gospel of John. We are moving ever on and closer to the end. By the end of this week, we'll be done. I hope it's been a really great time, and I hope you've had much really good, fruitful reading of the Word as you've worked through this book of the Bible. In John chapter 16, I want to lay out the structure of the chapter first and kind of just review what the sections are. And then I want to look at the statement he makes at the beginning and how he resolves that statement or provides some relief from what it is that he says there. It begins in the first section dealing with persecution. Jesus explains to them that they're going to experience significant persecution. He says, "All this I have told you so that you will not go astray." Verse 2, "They will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, a day is coming when anyone who kills you will think he is offering a service to God. They will do such things because they have not known the Father or me. I have told you this so that when the time comes, you'll remember that I warned you." So Jesus tells the disciples that they're about to experience significant persecution. And they certainly did. Most of the first century church were martyred. I think the only one that wasn't martyred was John, and he died on the Isle of Patmos. The legend, the tradition is that they tried to martyr him, they tried to murder him, but they couldn't. And so he just died of natural causes in exile. But all of the first century church experienced persecution. Excuse me. And he warns them about that in this passage. The next section deals with the Holy Spirit and the coming of the Holy Spirit. And he basically lays out two main purposes of the Holy Spirit in this section. He says in verse 8, "When he comes, he will convict the world of guilt in regard to sin and righteousness and judgment." So the first role of the Holy Spirit is to bring conviction of sin or conviction of guilt. And it's that conviction that actually brings us into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. It's the conviction of the Holy Spirit that makes us realize that something's not right and we need to change. And that's what drives us to Jesus. So the first role or function of the Holy Spirit is conviction. And the second role that he lays out there is to remind us and to lead us into all truth. In verse 12, he says, "I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear." So even within his lifetime, within the 3 years that he had to minister to the disciples, there was so much to teach that he couldn't possibly do it all in that short a period of time. And so something more was needed, and that's the Holy Spirit. But I have much more to say to you, more than you can bear. Verse 13, "But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth." So the second function of the Holy Spirit there is to guide the disciples into all truth, to help us to know the truth, to convict us of sin, and to reveal to us the truth of God. Those are the functions of the Holy Spirit. Now, obviously, we know that there's an empowering role. The Holy Spirit is the third person of the Godhead. So I don't want to limit in any way what his role or what his ministry amongst us is, but there's two major functions that Jesus lays out in this passage. Then he goes on the next section, he deals with his own resurrection, and he says, "I'm going away and I'm coming back to it. You will not see me, and then you'll see me again. For a little while," this is the way he puts it. And the end of that previous section, verse 16, he says, "In a little while you will see me no more, and then after a little while you will see me." So he talks about his death and his resurrection. But this brings a lot of confusion. The disciples don't understand what that means, and they go back and forth. And in explaining it, I think Jesus maybe confuses them more. He talks about a woman in labor, and she's got pain because she's in labor, but then she has the baby, and then she's joyful. And he says, that's what it's going to be like for you. You guys are going into your moment of pain, but you will rejoice soon enough. And that kind of goes back and forth for a little while. And there appears to be a revelation that the disciples get. He says to them in verse 28, "I came to from the Father and entered the world. Now I am leaving the world and going back to the Father." In verse 29, the disciples said, "Now you are speaking clearly and without figures of speech. Now we can see that you know all things and that you do not even need anyone to ask you questions. This makes us believe that you came from God." In verse 31, Jesus says, "You believe at last." It seems like the aha moment, the moment he's been waiting for 3 years of working with them. "You believe at last," Jesus answered. But then it's so short-lived, because in verse 32 he says, "But a time is coming and has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home. You will leave me alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me." Now, I want to look at the beginning of the chapter and that verse, because in both of those, Jesus prophesies persecution and difficulty. Even though they just had this revelation from God, he says, "You believe at last." But then he says, "But a time is coming and has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home." So in keeping with what he warned them about in the beginning, about the persecution that was to come, now he goes back to that. He reminds them about that again. And in both of those sections, what we see is that there will be persecution that will come to followers of Jesus Christ. And they will experience that. All followers of Jesus Christ will experience persecution in some way, and in some way, shape, or form. And we've really escaped a lot of that in the United States. I don't know if we'll continue to escape it as the world continues to get darker and darker. It might just be that we do begin to experience some of that. And if we do, whatever level, whether it's just even on a family level or on our jobs or more from the state government that ends up with us in jail or worse. The point that Jesus said, the reason why he told them what was going to happen, was so that they would be prepared for it. We may experience difficult times, and we may face persecution in our lifetimes, but we should never be caught off guard by that, because Jesus warned the disciples that it was going to come. And there's two things that he says in this chapter that I think are sort of mitigating factors to that. The first has to do with prayer. And he says in verse 24, "Until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask, and you will receive." And then he says this, "And your joy will be complete." So even though it seems like the theme of the chapter is persecution and suffering and difficulties, Jesus says that when we appropriate the tool of prayer in the right way, when we ask in his name, in line with his will and his plans and purposes, he says, "Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be made complete." We may experience difficulties, but we should never lose our joy. We can, in prayer, tap into a source of joy in God that is unquenchable. It will never run dry. It will endure in every difficulty, and it will be enough to keep us joyful in every difficulty. And then he says, the last line of the chapter, he says this, "I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." Again, in the theme of persecution, Jesus says that's what you're going to experience. In the world, you're going to experience persecution. You're going to experience difficulties. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. In him, we can have peace. And so between the joy that he promises and that joy that will be complete and the peace that he promises, we should be able to endure any difficulty that comes our way. God bless you guys. Have a great day.